Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is what I think is called the Xedusa, based on its spelling. I think that's how you would pronounce it, for the original Xbox. But before we get into all that stuff, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that already, and of course go in the description, hit me up on the social media stuff, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, etc. I appreciate the support over there. Thank you very much, and let's get on with it. So, yes, we're going to be talking about this, a brand new device from the Behar Bros, who are based out of Turkey, for the original Xbox. Ideally, to be able to give you an affordable yet reliable, high-quality HDMI video output solution for the original Xbox, requiring no modification. Now, the thing is, does it live up to that? Short answer, yes. Long answer, let's get going here. So first, to the Behar Bros, I want to say thank you because they sent this to me for free for the purposes of review, and just because I'm fat and they're nice, they also sent me a jar of Sorel, which is like the real version of Nutella. Nutella is the McDonald's equivalency. This is like the original Turkish concept. It has nothing to do with anything. I just want to thank them for that because that was very nice of them to do, was to help me gain weight, because obviously I need to do that. Now, yes, but this device, let's get into a little bit of the history, what this is, why this is needed, etc. So back in the day when Microsoft originally released the Xbox, and I have the special Mountain Dew limited edition here just for the pretties, when they originally released it, they gave you composite cables, you know, the ugly yellow ones that look like crap. They built in other options though. You could have S-Video out, you could even have SCART out if you were in Europe supporting 576i, and here you could also have up to component video. So you could have, depending on the game supporting it, you could have 480i, 480p, 720p, or 1080i. And Microsoft gave you that support in the form of this little box. This is the official Xbox High Definition AV pack. Plugs in the back, just like your standard cables do, but instead of composite coming out of it, you had the option for component. You also had a toslink port for superior audio. And that was pretty much a wrap on what Microsoft did with it. Now, it's worth noting, and this is key to this whole thing and why this even exists, that just because it's component, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the best. See, there was a ton of component cables made for the original Xbox, not just the Microsoft ones. There was good ones made by like Monster, those are actually nice, but then there was a ton of terrible ones that you could get on Amazon for like $8 from like generic no-name company or companies like Mad Catz or whatever that were just pumping out crap. You have to understand, if you're not into the whole cables thing, just because it's technically that format, that does not make it actually good. Build quality is a factor there. So Microsoft was in essence saying, this is it, this is what you should use, is this. Whether or not you did it was ultimately up to you. Now, as time moves forward in the modern era, components nice and all, but most of us want to try and use the original Xbox on a high-definition TV now. And while technically you can still do that with component cables, provided your TV actually supports that, enter one of the issues. A lot of TVs now are not even made with component cables. And I see a lot of people being like, oh, I'll just use like a component to HDMI converter. Those are usually really bad. I don't recommend it. Unless it's the RetroTink 5X, but that's a different discussion. A different video, which I've already done. So, the easiest solution would be some sort of plug-and-play device you just connect to the original Xbox that gives you HDMI output. Now, fortunately, there's been a lot of progress on that front. A lot of different devices have come out. I've done videos on a bunch of them, so let's go over them very quickly just so you understand the key differences. The first one that ever came out, at least that I remember, and that I did a video on, was this. This is the pound cable. This was not good. Now here's the reason this wasn't good. Ideally, in a perfect world, the way one of these devices should work is not that it necessarily enhances the original Xbox, just that it takes what's there and gives you a perfect one-to-one pass-through of that signal. It should in of itself not introduce any sort of new issues in the video signal. No noise, no nothing. It should just pass that signal through. That's the goal. The pound cable failed at that goal. It was just a cheap component to HDMI converter inside of a little box, and it didn't do that particularly well, thus introducing new images and artifacting and so on and so forth in the signal. People liked it because it was cheap and convenient, but it was cheap for a reason. It surprised me, shortly after that, Microsoft themselves licensed one to Hyperkin, which had their name on it. It's like, this is the solution. That's, to this day, the worst one I've ever used. I don't even have it out here. It's not worth talking about. Don't get the Hyperkin one. I know that Kaiko made one that was also pretty bad. Those were cheap. So what are the good solutions? Because we have finally entered that point where you have those options. Now, it's worth noting, and I got to point this out because I did a video on it and people are going to bring it up. What about the Xbox HD Plus? This is an asterisk in this video. This is not a plug-and-play solution. This is like a little board you have to install in the console that gives the console native HDMI output. I did an entire video on it if you're curious about it. Long and the short of it, yes, this is absolutely the best solution because you're essentially just replacing the problem entirely with modern hardware. Of course it's going to be the best solution, but it's also the most expensive and the least convenient. But yes, it is the best, but that's not going to work for most people. So if you're not the guy who's into a bunch of modifications, what do you got? You got two real options once you eliminate the bad stuff and the older, more useless stuff. Those two options being, first, the Chimeric Cable. Did a video on this. This one is fantastic. This is exactly what I wanted out of a cable like this. It's a perfect one-to-one pass-through of the signal, giving you that great high-definition mode. But it doesn't do anything else. It's not meant to. It doesn't enhance the signal in any way, shape, or form. It's not designed for that purpose. It just gives you what it said it would. So what is the flaw with this? Well, not much. You know, I said it at the time. There was a couple of little issues here and there, but nothing significant. It was a good price point. You know, I bought this one. It was totally worth the money. It was fantastic. The flaw with it, the only flaw with it, is availability. The guy who makes these, you know, he can only do like 8 at a time. I remember when he would put them up on his website, it was like a crapshoot. It's like, all right, go for it. Good luck, everybody. I don't know how I ended up with it. I got lucky. I managed to find one. One day, somebody, you know, that ordered, they canceled theirs or whatever, and I swooped in. I don't know. But that's pretty much how I got mine. Now, the thing is, since I've made that video, I've had people comment down below and be like, yo, I want this thing, but there's a wait list. And I'm thinking like, okay, wait list, maybe 20, 30 on the list, whatever. Thousands. I've had people messaging me being like, is there any other options out there? Because I'm literally like number 2,480 on a waiting list when this guy makes like 8 of these a month. Like realistically, you're not getting it in your lifetime at that point. So that's unfortunate. Not a problem with the hardware, just in the distribution. So what is our solution? Enter the Xedusa. Now, here's the thing with the Xedusa. I'm going to show you guys some gameplay captured footage right now. Boom, there you can see some of it happening. This is just raw capture as best I can do with the Xedusa, but I need to put a huge asterisk with this. Over the years, I've done many videos on these devices where I capture stuff and I try to compare it, and at the end of the day, it becomes very hard to tell the difference unless it's really, really obvious. It almost feels like a waste of time. So the reason for that is simple. In order to get the best video output of this thing, the human eye really just kind of needs to see it on an actual television. When you're capturing it, you're first of all limited to the capabilities of your capture device, which could present additional issues. In fact, it usually does because they have compression algorithms and all sorts of stuff, you know, in it, like things that like degrade the footage further. Then once it gets to your computer then has to, if you're editing it, which I have to do, it has to be rendered. Then it has to be edited through that process. Then it has to be exported, which compresses it again. Then it gets onto YouTube, which in of itself compresses it. So by the time you, the end user, are seeing what you are seeing, it's been through like 5 or 6 stages of some level of degradation. Thus, it is not a true representation of the footage. It's always been that way, but it's like it's more obvious than it used to be, in my opinion, just because I've done this so many times now. So I wanted you guys to see it. I'm happy to show you some footage, but all I'm trying to say is what you're looking at is not a true representation of what is actually capable from the console. And another factor boils down to what bandwidth you are watching this on and what sort of device you are watching this on. So just a rough approximation, but yes, there's some footage so you guys can say, hey, he did actually show some footage of it. Now, let's talk about the device itself. Back to it. So the device is essentially exactly the same as the Chimeric one, but with just a couple of changes that should be relatively obvious. For starters, it has the toslink port on it. Now, to be fair, there is a model of the Chimeric adapter that does have the toslink port. I opted not to get that one just because it was more expensive and I knew I wouldn't use it. So, yeah, technically the Chimeric one does have that, but it comes standard on the Xedusa, and I hope it's actually called the Xedusa, because otherwise I'm just horribly mispronouncing this the whole time. And it, of course, has the native HDMI output, which it does excel at. It does exactly the way it's supposed to. It's a perfect one-to-one pass-through. The Behar Bros went out of their way to design something that would be lossless. It would have no degradation to the signal and just give you what the original Xbox was thinking in. The biggest addition is basically that it also has component output on the side. So they give you an option here that nobody else ever has. You can actually have one or the other, or both. So if you're the guy out there who's like, hey man, I've got an original Xbox, I'm still using it with composite cables and stuff, or S-Video or whatever I've got, and I'm using it on an old CRT, I don't want to do an upgraded, like, you know, TV move there, but I do want a better image, what can I do? You can actually now recommend this because nobody else is really making modern component solutions for the Xbox anymore. So this would give you native component output, so you could still use it on a CRT that has component input, or if you want to use it on a modern TV that has component input. The point is, it's just an option. It's optional. You don't have to do it, but you can. And even better yet, it actually splits the signal, so you can actually set it to be on two different monitors at the same time. If you're doing some sort of tournament thing, or if you have some sort of recording setup that makes it easier to do that, or whatever your case might be, you now actually have the option to split the signal too. Interestingly, there is what appears to be a composite jack, the yellow one on the side. However, that's not for composite video. That's actually for additional audio capabilities. So yeah, it's worth noting of that. So yeah, overall, it's essentially goes full circle. It's the original Xbox AV official pack, because this had the component output and it had the toslink, but it would be like as if Microsoft put an HDMI port on the side. Boom. That's what the Behar Bros have given you. The Behar Bros make a lot of high quality stuff. Like I said, I've done videos on their stuff in the past. These guys like led the way on HDMI solutions for the original, for the Dreamcast. They also put out a whole bunch of stuff I covered over the years. They even did the Ultra CMVS console that I did a video on. They made that. These guys know what they're doing. They're very high quality. The only issue I have with this thing, as compared to any of the others, is just the actual plug-in itself. Because it just kind of, connects to the back, and it doesn't feel all that secure. It's kind of just held up by the port. It doesn't make contact with the ground. It doesn't have like a little rope to kind of let, or a connection and whatever, an extension to kind of let it go sit somewhere. It literally just hangs off the back of the Xbox, which to me feels like that screams eventual revision. I'm not saying that's going to happen or that's even necessary. It just, if I was going to make a change, it would be that, because that would just, to me, would feel a little more stable. Because when I look at it and I plug it in, it doesn't feel like it's going in all the way because the thing is so big, but it does. And it doesn't seem to have any issues working or anything like that. But that's the one thing where I'd be like, I'd really prefer some sort of like rope extension. The design itself is not the most attractive looking thing. It's more designed with function rather than form in mind, if you will. Like the component ports thing just kind of hangs off the top. It's not the most attractive thing, is really all I'm saying. But it does what it's supposed to do, which is vastly more important if you ask me. So I think it's great. Now, that said, there's a few things you should know about the actual original Xbox when in conjunction with these things. The original Xbox, by default, if you set it into something like composite cables, will just output 480i and not really give you any options. If you connect it with this, what you're going to want to do is go into the settings menu, and in there's going to be a section called video. From that, there's a few different options, and here's my personal recommendations. You'll notice that it has the option to basically set it to 480p support, as well as 720p support and 1080i support. I recommend turning off 1080i, but keeping 720p and 480p on. Now, the reason for that is the original Xbox, most of its games support 480p resolution. So if it's set to 480p, by default, if it's compatible, it'll always just work with those. Then there were like 100 or so games that support the 720p mode. Another reason to just keep that on all the time, because that'll look really good, and if it natively supports it, it'll just run it. The thing with the 1080i mode is that it's essentially useless. There were only 5 games that ever supported it, Enter the Matrix being the most well-known one. But if you ask me, the 1080i mode actually looks actively worse than the 720p mode. Now, Enter the Matrix and all the other 1080i games actually also support 720p, and again, in my opinion, look better running through that. That's a matter of opinion, but where it also can get into some sort of issues is that if you want to add anything to it, like an M cable or an M Classic here, which we'll get back to in a moment, it can create compatibility issues. It also can theoretically create compatibility issues depending on your TV. A lot of TVs, older ones from like the 2010 era, so again, it depends on what kind of monitor you're using, don't always support 1080i through HDMI input. They'll do it through component input, which again, this is what it thinks it is, but it's not anymore. Now it becomes HDMI. So when you connect it through 1080i and an HDMI input, there's a lot of TVs where it just will not function. So basically, all I'm trying to say is the 1080i mode has really zero advantage and only has potential negatives. So I just turn it off because it has no real use. But that's a matter of opinion. Also, if you have a modded Xbox, usually if you set it to 1080i, then the dashboard will run in 1080i. So then if you have compatibility issues, the console will appear not to function. And I'm just saying turn it off if you have the option. It doesn't need to be there, in my opinion. Getting into that now, like I said, this doesn't enhance anything. It just gives you the original signal that was intended to come out of the console. That's where it also gets a little tricky. Microsoft famously kind of changed the innards of the Xbox throughout its production, and over time the signal got worse. So here's the thing. If you have like an Xbox, there's on the bottom they have stickers that say what their production date is. If you have one made in like 2001 or 2002, typically you're good to go. If you have one from like 2003 to like, you know, towards the end, that's when you your luck can start to run out. And what I mean by that is the video quality gets worse. For example, this Mountain Dew Xbox, special edition, what have you, as pretty and rare as it is totally useless with these things. Because while it technically will work, the video signal is horrific because this thing is a mid-cycle original Xbox, meaning they cheaped out on certain parts, they changed some things, and it just doesn't look as good. And it's not the fault of these cables, it's the fault of this. So if you're like an Xbox enthusiast and you want the best out of the Xbox, sad truth is you need to find one made in 2001 or 2002. Which is typically what people aim for anyway, because those are also the ones that are easier to mod. So that's part of why Microsoft changed it, by the way. But anyway, so you want to keep that in mind. Now, unfortunately, those are not that hard to find because Microsoft mass-produced the hell out of them. So you can find them relatively easily. But that said, let's assume for a second you have an early era Xbox and you've got this thing. Now do you have the perfect setup? Theoretically. But I would recommend at that point also to throw on an M Classic. I've talked about this thing a million times to the point where it makes people sick. But long story short, this will just take the signal that it receives and it will enhance it depending on the supported resolutions. This will support the 480p modes and the 720p modes and output to 1080p, do some anti-aliasing, color enhancement, all sorts of stuff. I'll run some additional footage of that here, but once again, the same caveat exists. It's compressed YouTube footage, but all the same, I'm happy to show it to you guys. I seriously believe that the M Classic and this thing are a beautiful match together, and I highly recommend them, but I can't stress enough how much you need to look for an early model Xbox, because the later ones, even with, and it's not the fault of the Xedusa, it would happen with the Chimeric Cable, it would happen with the Pound Cable, it would even happen with the official Xbox component set. It's just, they look bad. It just looks like, you know, RF footage almost. It's very, very noticeable to the human eye on an actual television. The footage you're seeing is through a good one. It's through an early one using the Xedusa, and of course now with the M Classic, just to kind of give you the best of all the worlds there. But yeah, the long and the short of all of this is, if you're wondering, is this a good option? Is this worth the money? I would say I can definitely recommend it as a device. Ultimately, whether or not it's worth the money is up to you and how much you care about the original Xbox. If you were in the market for this and you're on that waiting list, go with this. Just because this will actually get to you a lot sooner. And it has a few additional features. I would never recommend the pound cable. And as I said before, this is a whole different animal. But yeah, if you're looking for the modern HDMI solution for the original Xbox, you want a high quality experience. As long as you know all the weird kind of factors around it, such as which version of the console you have, if you are going to go with an M Classic or not, etc. If you just want this still, that's also a good idea. I recommend it. So I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to check out the Behar Bros and pick it up there. Can't guarantee it'll come with a jar of Sorel, unfortunately, but the device itself is pretty solid. So I want to give a huge shout out to them for sending this my way. I do hope that if they do an upgraded version, they do think about putting on a little neck there. I think that would make a big difference. That's the one thing that really bugs me about it. But other than that, I had absolutely no complaints. It doesn't require a power supply. It doesn't have any additional settings on it or features or anything like that, so it doesn't need any firmware updates. It's just plug and go. So yeah, if you need any additional information on their website, they have a nice breakdown of like specifically which ports go with what, but I think you're pretty smart. You could probably figure that out. So that'll do it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, please like, comment, subscribe, check out the social media stuff in the description. Thank you very much to the Behar Bros. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.